Guys, before Hugh starts his great thing, I would like to tell you something more about IATEFL Poland, because it is on behalf of IATEFL Poland. I would like to visit you and would like to tell you something more about what is happening. Okay, what is happening in IATEFL Poland? This year we are celebrating 30 years of IATEFL Poland, and we've got especially a lot events online, of course, because in a special way we want to celebrate that we are here for teachers in Poland and also around the world. So today we meet Hugh, and we're going to listen to him. But soon we will be talking. We'll be watching Will Barnowski, who will talk about using rubrics in peer review and academic writing classes. It's going to be on 21st of May. But most of all, I would like to invite you to our conference, our annual conference, which is going to take place on the 17th and 18th September 2021. Again, it still will be online, and I know that you, just like me, are desperate to meet face to face and drink a beer together in a pub after the conference sessions, and then suffer hangover at early in the morning at 8 o'clock at Hugh's session. And this is something that I miss big time. But we hope to provide you with the human dimension, at least through the opportunity to meet great speakers in our online annual conference on 17th, 18th September. I would like to just add the last bit that as every year, IATEFL Poland is organizing also public speaking contests. And I truly believe that is something that will open the world to the students. And in this moment, I simply would like to invite all, unfortunately, Polish teachers only to motivate your students to take part in public contests. The topic for this time is a climate change, a threat, or okay, guys, if you could please mute all your microphones, that would help us a lot. Let's start with introduction to Hugh. He's a great advocate of lexical speaking, lexical approach, sorry. And Hugh also runs, along with Andrew Oakley, lexical lab, where they train and teach and provide the insight, language insight for students and teachers around the world. Dellar is also of many books. One of my favorite ones, lexical, teaching lexically. However, also, if you don't know, there is also a very short book, which is, and I got it on iTunes, and I got it in Apple, and it's excellent because it's teaching lexically in a shortened version, more, I would say, sorry Hugh, easy to understand than lexically, teaching lexically, right?
Big print.
Yeah. And of course, Hugh Dellar is also the author of Innovations and the Outcomes, fantastic books where lexical approaches put into practice. So without much further ado, Hugh, over to you.
Thank you very much. Give me a minute to share my screen. One sec. Can I just ask, if you still have your microphone on, can you turn your microphones off? Because someone is making crazy noises somewhere. Thank you. So thank you very much, Marcin, and thank you to everyone at Poland IATEFL for the great job you're doing, kind of keeping teachers connected and keeping teachers involved during such weird and stressful times where I think we've all been feeling that kind of lack of connectedness and lack of face-to-face contact with each other. Thank you also to all of you for joining us here. From watching the kind of chat room earlier, we've got people from everywhere, from the Philippines to Bangladesh, to Ukraine, to Russia, to Poland, to Peru, to Greece. So thank you all to Belarus, a few others I remember as well. Thank you to everyone for joining us here. So, as you probably are aware, my name's Hugh Dellar. I'm a teacher trainer, coursebook writer based in freezing North London at the moment. I'm also the co-founder of the Lexical Lab website, Language School Teacher Development Centre. And what I'm going to be talking about with you today is the whole issue really of memory and what we can do as teachers to activate students' memories in the classroom. Okay. When I first started thinking about this whole topic of memory, I had a weird flashback to the 1980s when I was growing up. And the thing that kept coming into my mind as I thought about the word memory was this. I don't know how many of you have been subjected to the full horror that is the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical Cats. But when I was a kid, Cats was enormous. It was like a kind of theatrical phenomenon. Cats was everywhere. And I've never actually seen the musical Cats. I've never watched the movie version of it. Can you turn your mics off, please? If you've got your microphone on, turn your microphone off. It will make life more pleasant for all of us. I thank you. So this kind of musical Cats was really, really omnipresent when I was a kid. And there was one particular song from Cats which stuck in my head forever. It has been stuck in my head forever. And the reason I kept thinking of it is because the only lyric I can remember from this song goes something like this. Memories all alone in the moonlight. Da 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 dum dum da 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 dum dum. Memories. Okay, it's like a big dramatic show-stopping Andrew Lloyd Webber kind of job. And as I had this song bouncing around my head annoyingly, I then started thinking about how weird it was that even though I must have heard this song hundreds of times, I mean, it was on the radio like every day when I was a kid, sometimes multiple times. And even though I must have heard it hundreds of times, and I must have understood all of the lyrics when I heard them, because they're in my mother tongue. Please turn your microphone off. Okay, whoever it is, really, it's going to get really annoying otherwise. Please check your microphone and see if you can turn your microphone off because it's making crazy noises. So the only line that I could remember from the whole song, despite having heard it hundreds of times, despite having understood all of the lyrics when I heard them, was this one line about memories all alone in the moonlight. And that was it, okay? So if that's the case for me with a song I've heard in my mother tongue hundreds of times that I'm only able to remember one line, imagine what it's like for your students. And I think there are some implications of this. I once had a lovely Chinese student called Hui, and I was doing a tutorial once with Hui and asking him, how are you finding the classes? How are you finding learning English? And he began by saying, understanding English, very easy. And I thought, that's great to hear. That must be because I'm such a good teacher and I'm helping you understand everything. He then said, but remembering English, very difficult. And, you know, ain't that the truth? It's easy for any of us to see and hear and understand and maybe even use a foreign language. Remembering it the next hour, the next day, the next week, the next month is really, really difficult. And as I said, from this song, Memories, from the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, what it shows is hearing and seeing and understanding isn't enough. Students need to notice the language and they need to have repeat exposure over time to the language. And I think at the moment, we don't place enough emphasis on memorizing. Memorizing is almost a kind of dirty word in language teaching. And as a result, I think we don't think enough about how to help students carry this burden of memory, how to help them deal with the huge amount of language we need them to learn. And the language load is insane. I mean, if you want to get to a stage where you can pass first certificate, say, okay, sort of B2 level, well, you need 3,000 or 4,000 keywords, okay? And that doesn't just mean memorizing single words. That means knowing how those keywords interact with each other and how they interact with grammar. So once you start thinking about the collocations and the chunks and the groups of words together, you're already talking about tens of thousands of words. If you want to be able to guess unknown words from written texts, you need to understand around 98% of the text. To understand around 98% of text, you need a working knowledge of around 15,000 words. And again, this involves knowledge of the multiplicity of uses. Educated, fluent speakers can use around 20,000 words in speech and in writing. Well, when you then think about course books, most course books, even if they include 50 new items per unit, that still only covers around 3,000 words by the time you get to advanced, okay? So you start to see the problem here. And I think there's a real catch. Just memorizing things isn't enough. You need to basically be working on moving language from your short-term memory into your kind of long-term internalized, proceduralized, automatic memory. A bit like when you're learning to drive and you're sitting in your car thinking, must remember, lift up the gear stick, change gear, put foot down on clutch, indicate, look in the mirror. You're thinking about all of these things as you're driving, thinking, I'm never going to get the hang of this. After a while, it all becomes automatic. You do it without thinking about all the different things you're doing at once, and you just focus on the road. The problem is, most of what language learning involves is a lot of forgetting. And as teachers, we don't like to intervene in the process of forgetting. Maybe some of you have the same problem I have because of my age, where you walk into a room and you remember that there was a reason why you went into that room, but you can't remember what the reason is. And you don't like to draw attention to this fact because it's embarrassing, because you lose face, because, you know, you're worried that the other people around you might get upset. But I think as teachers, we have a responsibility to intervene in this process of forgetting. as I said, memorization and the idea of learning by heart have sort of become dirty words in English language teaching. Where we do talk about them, it's usually in terms of encouraging students to remember language outside of class, which is great. Okay, I think that's a good thing to do. I'm not saying don't do it. Or we talk about warmers and games and activities that we can use at the start of lessons to revise things that we've previously taught. Also great. Okay, I'm not saying don't do these things. These are the things we do generally talk about. There's a handout that I hope everyone will be forwarded, by the way, that I've sent on to Poland IATEFL, that maybe they'll send on to you later, that looks at ways of doing exactly these things. But that's not what I'm interested in today. What I'm interested in looking at is ways that we as teachers can cultivate a kind of culture of memorization in the classroom, and ways in which we as teachers can encourage students to demonstrate or perform what they've already learned. And we're just going to look at different ways you can do this. The first way I'm going to suggest you can do this is, can you turn your microphones off, please? Please turn your microphones off. It's really annoying for everyone. Please turn your microphones off. The joys of online teaching.
What happened?
Someone's got their microphone on.
What's your microphone?
Come on, I'm teaching. Leave me alone. The joys of working online from home. So one of the things that I think we can do to kind of keep language appearing in students' memories is think about how we lead into the speaking tasks that we're going to ask students to do. And I'm going to show you a speaking practice activity from a course book that I co-authored. This is an exercise from Outcomes Intermediate. It's at the end of a little grammar section looking at verb patterns, things like offered to do, insisted on doing, told you to do something, told you not to do something. And basically the task is work in pairs, discuss these questions. When was the last time someone you know did these things? Okay. Now, imagine that you're going to get your students to do this. Think about what would you say? What would you do? How would you lead into this yourself? And how might this connect to the idea of activating memory in the classroom? Well, I'm going to show you a quick video of me teaching a real class leading into this particular activity, and then I'll talk through what I think I'm doing here. Okay, so let's hope this works.
Page 109 at B. Just think about the last time someone offered to do something for you, someone promised to do something, someone insisted on doing something, someone persuaded you to do something, or persuaded you not to do something, someone told you to do something or told you not to do something.
Sorry, mate, I'm going to do something.
For example, Saka was saying, when he was in Vienna this weekend, he arrived at the airport, he wanted to buy a ticket to get into town. He looked at the machine, he had no idea how to work the machine. The couple behind him asked him if he spoke German. He said no, Japanese and English. Luckily, they spoke English. They offered to help him, they offered to buy the ticket for him. Okay, so just for you.
So you get the idea. This kind of modelling, this kind of teacher talk, I think, is something that lots of teachers get scared out of doing, because when you do teacher development courses, people will often tell you, oh, teacher talking time, very bad. Student talking time, very good. Well, if you stop your teacher talking time, you're missing a trick. Actually, what often happens is when you don't do much teacher talking time, you don't get much student talking time. What sometimes happens is you say, when was the last time you did these things? And some students will literally just go for the shortest answer possible and say, first one, last Tuesday. You, 2 years ago. Second one, Wednesday. You, 1 year ago. Finished. if you give your own model, on the one hand, you're giving students a clear idea of what kind of turn you want them to take. You're showing them, I don't just want you to say when, I want you to tell a little story around this. You're kind of legitimizing and creating this culture of storytelling in the classroom. On top of that, what else you're doing is you're exposing students to useful lexis and grammar. Often, this is language that they've already studied that you're kind of pushing back into the forefront of their minds. You're kind of forcing them to re-encounter language they might otherwise start to forget. And of course, you can feed in new language that might be useful for them when they're doing the task themselves. As you get better at this, you get better at using your voice more to draw attention to the language. You get better at grading your language to the level of your students. You definitely get better at recycling things you've already taught more consciously, and therefore kind of pushing the language back into the students' minds. Some of you may know this Stephen Krashen idea of comprehensible input being I+1, where I is the current level you're now at, and the +1 is a +1, whatever that means, okay? He never really defines the +1, but one way you might think about this is I is the language that you've just studied already. The +1 is this wrapped up in a little story. So what I'm doing in my model there is I'm recycling things I know that the students have already encountered. So, you know, little bits of grammar. They asked him if he spoke German. He had no idea how to use the machine. They offered to help him. They offered to buy him a ticket. So I'm kind of representing to the students and keeping alive in their memories, passively, receptively, at the moment, this language that they've already encountered. So modelling, good thing to do, good way of keeping language moving in students' brains. The next thing to think about is what we do as teachers after student speaking, okay? How we round up. And when I was a younger teacher, either I didn't do much roundup at all. I would just kind of go, that was great, you did loads of speaking. I must be a really student-centered teacher, well done. Or later, I would do kind of punitive feedback where I would say, yeah, I heard some really interesting things, but I also heard a lot of grammar mistakes. I've written 42 of them down on the board. Let's correct them together. Now, I do things rather differently. And I think thinking about what you do as a teacher when you're rounding up student speaking, what do you say when you stop the students? What kind of a roundup do you do? Do you use the board? Why do you do things that way? Thinking about these kind of, you know, little everyday things and how to do them better, how to do them, you know, as best as you can is really, really important. So again, I'm going to just show you a little bit of teaching. This is from Outcomes Upper Intermediate. It's a unit on accidents and injuries. And the students have done some vocab and some grammar, and they have to do a little speaking task where they choose a picture and they tell the story of what happened to them as if they were one of the people in this picture to their partners. And I'm going to show you me rounding up what had happened, and then I'll talk about what I think I'm doing and why. Okay? So, again.
If you're going hiking in the mountains, okay, go stop now, sorry. Just very quick thing some of you are asking about. The story about the bee. If you're walking and you go past the place where the bees live, yeah, and there's millions of bees in there, it's a bee house. Little windows and doors. They've got a TV in there. But very amazing animals. Not a house. Bee. Nest for birds, usually. Beehive. Yeah. I mean, the idea is the house of the bees. It's a beehive. So, you know, maybe we walked past a beehive, and I don't know how, but somehow, I guess we must have made them angry. They started chasing us. They stung me. This one, if you cut yourself really badly, it's a nasty cut. You have to go to hospital and have stitches. Oh no, you poor thing. I know. Look, I've still got the scar. Yeah. Can be physical, the scar, can also be emotional. So, you know, after the end of a relationship, I've still got the scars. After the terrible experience of having to live in England and learn English, it scarred me for life, you know, in my heart. It scarred me. Yeah? Yeah, it can be. It's often like a kind of joke. Oh, it was terrible. It scarred me for life. Yeah.
So again, you get the idea. I think what I'm doing here is, rather than focus on error and kind of punitive correction, it's basically working from what I heard the students say and helping them say things better. In other words, it's reformulating. It's taking student output and turning this into whole class input. And you'll notice the way that I kind of stop these days is to say, so, stop there. I heard some really interesting things. Let's look at how to say these things even better. Okay, it's a very different psychological message to let's correct your errors. And what's happening when I'm doing this kind of reformulation is a lot of both explicit and implicit recycling of vocabulary and grammar that's already been taught. So as I'm telling those stories, I'm eliciting things like, I had to have, yes, stitches. Oh no, you poor thing. Good, well done. And I've still got a little scar. Good, you remembered it. So there's kind of conscious elicitation where I'm asking the students to show me and show themselves, have you remembered this? Oh, you have. Good, well done. You're learning something. The learning is visible. We can all see it and hear it. There's also kind of implicit recycling. So on the board, you have things like, we must have somehow made them angry. I knew when I was teaching that class, we've already done must have for predicting or guessing about the past. So I'm just kind of covertly recycling that and keeping that alive in students' minds. And that happens not only through the board work, but also through my extra stories. So as I'm telling this story about, yeah, we must have somehow made them angry, they chased us, ow, and they stung us. Again, that's language that I know I'd taught already, that I'm just representing to the students to keep the language moving in their minds. Sometimes I'm also working from a place of student need. Like 2 or 3 students wanted to talk about the beehive and didn't know the word for it. So I'm trying to find out, does anyone know the word? No, not a bee house. Bee nest? No, 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 no. Anyone? Beehive. There you go. You didn't know that. Now you know. This kind of reformulation is the general way I work with student speaking these days, whatever level I'm teaching. It can also occur just when you're checking answers to other kinds of activities, okay? So this is from the same level. The students have done some work on language for explaining cause and effect. And they then talk about the cause and results of these medical problems. Students have been discussing this. I then go through the answers. And again, I'll show you one final classroom video, and then I'll talk a bit about what I think is going on there. Okay? So bear with me.
Building more cities and more cars and more factories, the incidence of asthma increased a lot. Yeah? And migraines caused by, I think it's stress mainly, yeah? I don't know. And yeah, insomnia caused by? Yeah, I mean, often caused by stress, caused by worrying, maybe also caused by, you know, addiction to coffee or cigarettes or this kind of thing. You know, you drink 15 cups of coffee every day, you can't sleep. Yeah, could be caused by studying English as well, maybe. And sneezing caused by? Yeah, could be you've got a cold. Could be allergies. And if you're allergic to the pollen from flowers, you suffer from hay fever. So it's often caused by hay fever as well. Yeah? A few things you were talking about. This one about, how do you pronounce it? Diabetes. Yeah? If you have diabetes, your body can't sugar. It can't break down and use sugar. It can't process sugar. And the adjective, so for example, for me, my dad is nice one, son. This is for when you go deaf later in your life. Yeah. My dad is diabetic. Yeah. So the illness or the condition, diabetes, the adjective, diabetic. And in the same way, if you suffer from asthma, you are asthmatic. And this one about malaria, yeah, where it's carried and spread by mosquitoes. So the disease is by mosquitoes. True. From one person to another person to another person. Transmitted. Yeah, it's like HIV can be transmitted by blood transfusions, can be transmitted by unsafe sex. And this last one about what happens to you, maybe if you get insomnia or you get, I don't know, rashes or something like this. If you're working too much, you're not eating properly, maybe you're not sleeping very well, your body gets into a bad condition. You become really Everything's in a bad condition, you're not healthy, it's easier for you to get a cold. You're really down, run down. Yeah. Can also be used to describe an area. So if there's an area and it's really run down, all the buildings are old and broken, the shops have closed down, building more cities.
Okay, you get the idea again. Again, what's happening here, I think, is this sort of mixture of elicitation of things I think students should be able to remember, like process and transmitted. There's also some sort of subliminal recycling of things, like the incidence of asthma increased a lot. And there's kind of covert recycling of grammar in context that students have already seen. So they get to meet the present simple passive again. Malaria is transmitted by mosquitoes. They get to see the present perfect continuous again. I've been working really hard recently. Okay? And I think over time, through this exposure and through this experience, this is how the grammar and the vocabulary slowly start to stick. Now, if you're looking at that thinking, God, isn't it difficult to work out which things to gap? The answer is yes, it can be. Working out which words are the only plausible missing words is hard. Eliciting can sometimes be hard. And I remember myself from when I was a younger teacher and I first started doing this. I made some terrible errors. You know, I would say things like, right, so I heard some really interesting things. Some of you were saying you're lucky because you've got a really job. Anyone? Good, good, wonderful, amazing, excellent. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Keep going. Brilliant, fantastic. No, no, anyone else? Superb. No, no, anyone else? What I was looking for was rewarding. Okay, but you know, there's no way people are going to shout that out without narrowing that gap down in some way. In the same way, someone was talking about their free time, and I can't even remember what the missing word was, but I was trying to elicit based on this gap. I have quite a lot of which is nice. You know, I mean, it could be anything. Money, you know, boyfriends, girlfriend, sex, houses, cars, who knows? It could be lots of different things here which fit the gap. So it takes time to get good at this, and probably you will do some stupid gaps that you fail to elicit the words you're looking for. That's how you learn. It's part of the learning curve. I think it is, though, worth sticking with, because there's a lot of research that suggests this kind of chunking of things is important. Things that are stored together in the mind tend to be retrieved together. So the mind tends to kind of automatically chunk memories in terms of relationships. The research also suggests that this kind of distributed practice, which basically means exposure over time, interspersing the items you're looking at among other items, results in more effective memory retention than simply doing 10 exercises on one thing at once. Massed practice, if you like. Sentences also seem to be easier to learn if students meet them in meaningful contexts, maybe because these kind of contexts require a bit more processing, a bit more engagement with the language. And students seem to learn best when there's not just meaningful engagement, but a kind of personal stake. So if you're working with things that students themselves tried to say, it's personally relevant, personally meaningful, personally engaging. If you're not sure how to do the kind of board work you saw me doing, just cheat, basically. Not something I often encourage teachers to do, but it works in this context. And the way you cheat is simply, you look at the exercises, you predict in advance what you would say, what you think your students might say, you write good whole sentence examples, you select the best gaps, the words which can only be one thing, you think about how you're going to paraphrase those words to elicit them. As students are talking, you talk to one pair or one breakout room and you say, yeah, I know what you mean. You go and write on the board one of your sentences that you take from up your sleeve. Then you go and talk to another pair. Then you go back and write on the board or write on your Word document. And at the end, you stop and say, okay, stop there. That was great. Let's look at how to say some of what you were trying to say better. I heard someone say, and students will never ask you, who said this? You know, it doesn't matter. It's a little game you're playing to look at how to say things better and to revise and recycle and keep things you've already studied moving in the brain. Another thing that you can do that I don't think we do enough is a kind of test and remember activity. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute, but these kinds of exercises work best where you're looking at questions matched with answers, or statements matched to responses, or comments matched to follow-up comments, verbs matched to collocations, beginnings of sentences matched to endings of sentences. And when you have these kind of two-part exercises, you can do something like this. This is from Outcomes Pre-Intermediate. And, you know, on the surface, it looks like a standard, normal vocabulary exercise. In 1 to 8, you have adjectives describing character. In A to H, you've got examples of these kind of personality traits or characteristics. So imagine the students have tried this exercise, they've checked their answers in pairs, you're going through it and you're saying, right, number one, she's very neat and tidy. Yeah, D, she always puts things away and keeps things organized. Number two, my granddad's very wise. Yeah, F, I always go to him for advice when I have problems, when I need someone to tell me what to do. In the past, I used to do these exercises and say, great, okay, let's move on. Now, what I will do is to say, okay, so stop there. I'm going to give you 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Have a look at the language again. Try to remember the sentences. Students always go, oh, it's impossible. Hey, I didn't say I expect you to remember every word. I said, try to remember. Okay, 3 minutes, close your books. A, B, A, B, A, B. A, open your books. B, close your books. Make sure B is the strong student and A is the weak student. A, read out 1 to 8. B, see if you can remember the follow-up comment. So A, she's very neat and tidy. B, oh, she always puts away things. No, she puts things away and she organizes things. Ah, you got it wrong. She keeps things organized. Okay, after 3 minutes, change. A, close your books. B, read out A to H. Student A, try to remember sentences 1 to 8. Okay, so it's a kind of test and remember thing. And the lovely thing about this is it works really well with mixed level groups. As I said, you give the weaker student the chance to read the sentences first. The stronger student is tested. The stronger student has more to remember. The weaker student, when they're tested, has had those extra 3 minutes to kind of read and try to remember. And they're remembering less than the stronger student. Students can then go home and test themselves. You just say, go home, your homework, cover up A to H, see if you can remember it. Tomorrow, cover up 1 to 8, see if you can remember it. Next class, instant revision activity. Next class, you just say, okay, close your books, quick memory test. I always go to my granddad for advice because he's very wise. Good. My sister, she keeps things very organized and she always puts things away because she's, I can't remember what it was. She's very neat and tidy. Good. You've got a good memory. Better than me. Well done. And I think what it does is also send a message to students. And the message is, it's not enough to do the exercise and get the correct answers. That's great if you've done the exercise and got the correct answers, but I want more from you. I want you to notice, I want you to pay attention, I want you to try and remember, and we're going to repeat, okay? And through this, we're going to make the learning visible. I'm going to encourage you and give you space to perform memorization, to show me what you've learned, to show yourself how much you've remembered. One other thing that you can do connected to this is re-elicit texts, by which I mean reading texts or listening texts. Again, I think often what we do in class is we do a reading or a listening, we do comprehension questions, we maybe do some vocab or some grammar or some speaking around the text, and then we forget it, it vanishes. Well, again, this is like an instant revision activity. So what you do is, next lesson, you say, hey, do you remember in class last week, you heard that listening about the accident that those people had in Switzerland? In pairs, how much can you remember? Well, what usually happens is students remember the story, but they've forgotten the language that the story came in. So the students will say things like, oh, it was a holiday with bicycles and they go down a big a hill like this, and at the bottom there is like this, and they fall from the bicycle into the small trees and is very hurt. Okay, that's great. They remember the content. What you then do as a teacher is re-elicit from the whole class, and you disrupt the interlanguage by bringing them back face to face with the language that was used in the actual text that's a step up from where they are. So what you're doing is you're saying, right, so tell me, what kind of holiday was it? Yeah, it was a holiday with bicycles. So they were on a cycling holiday. Good. They were on this cycling holiday in the Swiss Alps. And one day they were going down not just a hill. What do you call it? If it's like, yeah, a very steep hill. And at the bottom of the hill was a very, not corner, a very tight bend. Good. Yeah, it was like this, a very tight bend. And as they were going round the bend, they fell off their bicycles and they fell into, what do you call those fell into the bushes. Yeah, and one of them broke his arm and broke 3, what do you call these? 3 ribs. Good. And by doing this, what you're doing is you're removing students from their comfort zone. You're forcing them to pay attention, not only to the meaning, not only to the content, but also to the language. And then you're rewarding the performance of memory, okay? And once students grasp that this is what you're doing, they start to get competitive about it. I had a student once called Guo Li, who was a Chinese woman. She was amazing. She had grown up in China during the Cultural Revolution when all the schools were closed, and she spent a lot of time marching up and down denouncing teachers. She later became a teacher in one of life's little ironies. And like a lot of Chinese people that age, she'd been forced to memorize Mao's Little Red Book. And I used to go out drinking with this group of kind of older Chinese students, and they were amazing. Like, they would get drunk and they'd test each other, and they'd kind of go like, okay, bao bao, li dao. And the other guy would go, page 42, next line. And he'd remember the next line. So when I would tell these students, I want you to go home and try and remember the language in the text, they would look at me and go, only one text? It's like, well, for today, only one text. There'll be another one tomorrow, don't worry. Very easy. And Guo Li was incredible because she would basically remember the entire text. She'd come into class next lesson and say, they were on a cycling holiday, and one day they were going down a steep hill. At the bottom, there was a tight bend, the whole thing. One day, while she was kind of repeating all of this stuff, one of the Italian lads in the class stood up and knelt down in front of her and started doing this and said, Guo Li, the memory queen. And henceforth, she became known as the memory queen. Every now and then, she would forget something, and one of the other students would go, I know this one, I know this one. So, Fernando, go on, tell me. Tight bend. We have a new memory king. Fernando, the memory king. Guo Li has lost her crown. And this basically became this very kind of competitive thing in the classroom because it was rewarding the performance of memory. And this created a specific culture in the classroom where students were aware that this is what was valued. So just to finish, before we see if there are any questions, a little kind of cheesy, schmaltzy, Andrew Lloyd Webber musical-esque ending. If you never have a dream, then you'll never have a dream come true. One of the things that I think is very clear about teaching is that if you have low expectations of your students, if you think they're failures, if you think they're going to be trouble or they're not going to achieve well, guess what? They will pick up on this and they will live down to your expectations. If you expect more from the students and you expect them to do well and you expect them to pay attention to the language and to memorize the language and to show you that they've memorized the language, they won't memorize everything. They won't remember everything. Not every student will remember the same amount, and not everything they remember will immediately become part of their productive output. But the more you expect students to remember things, and the more you make performance of memory part and parcel of what you do in the language classroom, the more your students may be able to remember. Okay, if you don't aim high, you don't get high. If you aim high, you don't always get high, but almost certainly you get a damn sight higher than if you just aim low. So on that note, I'm going to finish and just say, that's not the one I wanted. Please do contact me. I'll put my contact details in the chat box now. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Maybe just put the questions in the chat, or I don't know, yeah, put the questions in the chat if anyone's got any questions, I guess. I'll just put my details in there, yeah. Does dear sir refer to me? Dear sir. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions, just stick them in the chat box and we'll take it from there. Always feel weird when people call me sir. No need for it. How would you test and remember in one-to-one classes? So quite a few people asking this. Same sort of thing in a way. Use my own teacher talk as a way of recycling things. Get students to retell texts. I do those little test and remember activities with students. You know, in a way, all of those things are basically the same. When I'm reworking and reformulating things students are saying, I will try to make sure that I'm revisiting, recycling, repeating language that I know the students have already met before. I might ask them, yeah, what tense is it there? Present perfect continuous. Good. Why? Yeah, continuing from the past to now. So I think in that way, all of those principles are basically the same. And I guess you can also do more explicit revision-based activities. You know, you can do gap-filled sentences. You can ask questions about some of the language that you studied in the last lesson. You can do personal discussions based on some of the language that came up in the last lesson. Yeah, same as you can in a normal class. Just maybe sometimes you have to take the part of the other student. Yeah, anyone else have any other questions? Let me know. I'm just having a quick look back up to see if there's anything I missed. Yeah, I don't have the link, Maria. I'm guessing someone else will provide the link. You're welcome, Yulia. Oh, I see another question about one-to-one classes. Yeah, you can see the link there to the handout. That's very nice. Do you introduce new language at the stage or just focus on reformulating? So when I'm reformulating, Aga, sometimes it's new language. It depends. Sometimes I don't know what's going to be new and what's not going to be new for students. Some things it's explicitly revisiting and recycling. Some things, like that thing about the beehive. Okay, I mean, it's not massively useful, but two students were looking for it as they were doing that activity. So there, I'll introduce something new. Run down. We'd had that before to talk about areas, like it's quite a rundown area. They need to invest more money in it. They didn't know that you could also use that to talk about people. Like, you know, I've been working loads recently. I'm a bit run down. So it was kind of revising, but kind of expanding. So a mixture. I think it's good to reformulate using language you've already covered with your students, but it's also good to sometimes include some new things that come up because students are trying to express those ideas. Ah, Carmen saw cats. I'm so sorry. I hope you survived that experience, Carmen. The horror, the horror. Maybe you can remember more of the song than I can. So let me just see if there's any other questions that have come in. I'm just checking further down. Yeah, you can see all the details there. Please do look at the Lexical Lab site. Find us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, all that stuff that people do these days. Yeah. Yeah, message from Marcin about how you can access. I'll just wait 1 more minute and see if anyone else has any questions. Recommend, I can't even pronounce that word, mnemonic techniques for memorizing. Yeah, I mean, I know people do use mnemonics for memorizing, but I've never used it particularly successfully. The only kind of mnemonic that's ever really worked for me is remembering certain foreign words because of weird first language associations, okay? And again, I think maybe lots of people do that kind of thing. So when I was living in Indonesia, for example, the word for slippery in Indonesian is licin. Okay, like, wah, licin sekali di sini ya. Like, it's very slippery here. I remembered that word because it reminded me of like lichen or lichen. I don't even know how you pronounce it. L-I-C-H-E-N, which is this kind of green stuff that grows on rocks and is sometimes very slippery if it's been raining. So I kind of remembered green stuff on rocks, lichen sounds a bit like lichin, okay? That was my mnemonic technique for that. Sometimes I kind of remember things because they sound a bit like words in English, yeah? You know, I mean, I remember the Russian word for having lunch, обедать. I remember it because it sounds like a beer. I know it's a beer something, a beer dits. I just remember the dits bit on the end. Using flashcards, yeah, absolutely, definitely. In the handout I've sent, there's some ideas on using flashcards. I mean, I use Quizlet all the time with my students and with myself. If you're interested, email me, Maria Antonietta. Maria, email me and I'll send you a video about using Quizlet and some ideas on best ways of using Quizlet. Journal writing, good activity. Yes, I think any kind of writing is a good activity to practice the chunks. I think one other thing to say, okay, is don't expect everything that you teach to become part of the student's active vocabulary. It won't be. Not everything you know in your first language is part of your active vocabulary. When you think about what we said earlier about language, okay, let's assume I know 25,000 words. Well, my average spoken day-to-day vocabulary is probably somewhere around 2,500, 3,000 words, okay? So there's another like 17,000 words which are sitting there in my receptive knowledge. And that's the same for everyone in their own first language. Yeah, let me see if I can just find a link for that video. Give us a second. You know, basically a lot of language isn't going to become part of your active vocabulary. It's going to stay part of your passive vocabulary. So I don't think you should panic when students don't start producing language that you've taught them. It doesn't work like that. A lot of language that you teach will be basically kind of slowly filtering around in the brain, yeah? It won't necessarily be things that are actively produced. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the quick video for the Quizlet thing. Give me a minute. Yeah, sorry. Bear with me here, bear with me. Give me a second. Yeah, okay, I found it. So I'm just going to share a video on using Quizlet. Okay. Hi, so this is... Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll post the link here. So there you go. Oh, wait a minute. I'll put it to everybody. I'm sorry. Everyone in the meeting. There you go. There's a link to Quizlet. If you do go to the YouTube site to look at the Quizlet thing, please do subscribe to the Lexical Lab YouTube site as well. Always good to get a few more people following us. Okay, I guess I've taken up quite enough of your time. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you to Poland IATEFL for organising all of this, and to Marcin for organising things. Keep in touch, and you know where to find me if you want to. Okay, Sir Hugh. I'm not a sir. I've never met the Queen. I wouldn't take a knighthood if I were offered one. So, on that note, I shall leave you. It's going to become a thing, isn't it? I'm never going to be able to escape this. Just Hugh is fine. So, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your evenings and take care. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining in. Please do check your mailboxes within 1 week. You should get your personalized certificates. Please mind you, we are running as a voluntary organization, and we ask for your understanding. Some things may be slightly delayed from time to time, as the hectic life of teaching online is also affecting us who work at IATEFL Poland. Please remember that today you met Hugh Dellar, but in a few days' time you may watch the webinar by Willow Barnowski. It's going to be about using rubrics and peer review in academic writing classes. Always up-to-date information you may take from iatefl.org.pl. And please also follow us on Facebook and YouTube. If you follow us on YouTube, you will get the instant information about the all new webinars recordings. So please stay with us. Think about joining us at our 30th annual international conference at 17th and on 17th and 18th of September. The topic for this year's conference is the human dimension. Call for papers is still on, so you may join us through iatefl.org.pl. Polish teachers, please remember that your students may take part in public speaking contest online. The topic for this year is climate change, a threat or an opportunity. And once again, thanks a lot to Hugh Dellar, who was our guest today. Remember that you may read Hugh's message to you at iatefl.org.pl website. The links are in the chat box. Thank you very much, guys, and see you soon on Willow Barnowski webinar on the 21st May at 8:30 Central European Summer Time. Okay, so all for now, and all the best to you. Bye bye.